When you live alone long enough, even the sound of the phone can feel like company. That morning, the house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the rocking chair I inherited from my late husband, Charles. The sun was just beginning to crawl through the curtains when the phone rang sharp, unexpected, almost nervous, like it didn't want to disturb the silence. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered. "Hello, Mother May." It was Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. Her voice was sweet, too sweet, the kind of sugar that hides something bitter underneath. "Good morning, dear," I said, trying to sound as warm as I could. "How are you and Michael?" "Oh, we're wonderful. Listen, I was thinking maybe we could have lunch tomorrow, just us two, at the Azure." The Azure. I nearly dropped the phone. It was one of those restaurants you see in glossy magazines, tall glass windows, gold-rimmed plates, and prices that make you pray before ordering. I'd never been inside, though I'd heard Vanessa mention it every time she posted pictures of her business dinners. "Lunch at the Azure," I repeated, half in disbelief, half in hope. "Yes, Mother May," she said, her voice lilting. "You deserve a little treat." My treat. I smiled. I wanted to believe it. Lord knows, I did. Maybe this was her way of softening things. Maybe she'd realized how distant she'd been, how her smile had turned sharp over the years. Maybe this was her way of saying, "I'm sorry." After we hung up, I stood by the window for a long time, the phone still warm in my hand, outside. The roses in my little garden were blooming. Charles used to say roses were stubborn, they survived storms, droughts, even neglect. Special flowers, he'd called them. They remind you to keep blooming, even when nobody notices. Sometimes I wonder if he'd been talking about the roses, or about me. I spent the rest of the day preparing like it was Sunday service. I ironed my lavender dress, the one with small pearls around the collar. Charles always said it made me look like I had quiet dignity. I smiled at the memory. My reflection in the mirror startled me for a second. Silver hair neatly curled, lines on my face deep but not unkind. You reach an age where your wrinkles stop being flaws. They become footnotes, proof that you've lived, loved, and maybe forgiven too much. Before leaving the bedroom, I opened my jewelry box. Inside was a small velvet pouch holding my mother's gold bracelet. It wasn't fancy, just a simple loop with a faded engraving, "Faith keeps you graceful." She gave it to me the night I left home for college. I remember her saying, "May, this bracelet belonged to women who learned how to survive with grace. Pass it on when your heart tells you it's time." My heart whispered that maybe tomorrow would be that time. Vanessa was part of my family now. If there had been distance, I wanted to bridge it not with money or gifts, but with love, with something that meant roots, history, belonging. I slipped the bracelet into my purse and sat down for a moment. The house smelled faintly of roses and old coffee, the kind of scent that makes you nostalgic for a life you didn't even realize was slipping away. For a brief moment, I felt something like peace, but beneath it, there was a tremor, a small, persistent worry I couldn't name. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. My heart was fluttering like a schoolgirl's before a first date. I brewed tea and sat by the window, watching the sky blush pink. There's a quiet kind of joy in having something to look forward to, even if it's fragile. I thought of Michael, my son, the boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who used to say, "Mama, you're my special person." Funny, Isn't it? How we spend our lives being someone's special person, only to grow old and become invisible. Somewhere along the years, I went from being mom to being the old lady who babysits. Still, I couldn't hold that against him. Michael had a good heart, just a soft spine. Vanessa was the one steering the ship now. Sometimes I felt like an ATM with feelings always dispensing care, advice, money when asked, but never really seen. I laughed softly at that thought. An ATM with feelings. I whispered, shaking my head. It was sad, but it was true. Yet here I was, holding on to hope. Hope that maybe Vanessa wanted to reconnect. Hope that love, even lopsided, misunderstood love, still had a chance to be heard. By noon, I was ready. I dabbed a touch of rose perfume behind my ears, the same scent Charles loved. Smells like a woman who remembers her worth, he once said. I stepped outside, locking the door behind me, and the air felt different, brighter, almost theatrical, as if the world knew something I didn't. The taxi driver, a cheerful young man, smiled when I gave him the address. The Azure Fancy Place, ma'am. You celebrating something? I paused. Maybe, I said. Maybe I am. The drive downtown took 20 minutes. Skyscrapers glittered under the Georgia sun. The closer we got, the smaller I felt, like my world of casseroles and church hymns didn't belong among marble floors and designer shoes. But I sat tall anyway, chin up, like the women who came before me. When we arrived, the restaurant stood like a crystal palace, all mirrors and light. I caught my reflection in the glass doors. For a second, I didn't see a 68-year-old widow. I saw every woman who had ever been underestimated and still showed up with grace. Thank you, Lord, I whispered, touching my purse where the bracelet rested. Help me carry myself right today. Inside, a doorman in white gloves opened the door with a smile too polite to be real. The air smelled like champagne and ambition. I spotted Vanessa almost immediately. She was sitting at a table near the center, her posture perfect, her laughter loud enough to fill the room. Two women sat with her, both dripping in jewelry. I hesitated. She hadn't mentioned bringing company, but when she saw me, she waved with that dazzling, practiced smile. Mother May, over here. My heart skipped. I walked over, trying to quiet the nervous tremor in my hands. Vanessa, I said softly, it's so good to see you. She stood up, leaned in for a quick air kiss. You look adorable. Oh my God, is that vintage? She asked, touching my dress sleeve lightly. From the 80s. I smiled, still holding up. Wow, one of her friends said. They sure made things to last back then. They laughed. I smiled too, the polite kind of smile you wear when you realize you're the punchline. Something inside me tightened, like a string about to snap. As I sat down, I caught the shimmer of the chandelier above. It looked like 1,000 tiny eyes watching silently, waiting, and for a moment, I wondered, had I walked into a reunion or a test? The waiter placed a menu before me. I glanced at the prices and quietly folded it shut. This wasn't my world, but I had promised myself one thing: I wouldn't let anyone make me feel small again. I looked at Vanessa across the table, her smile, her glittering earrings, her confidence. For years, I thought she was everything I wasn't: modern, successful, unbreakable. But now, looking closer, I saw something else, a hunger, the kind that feeds on being admired. And I realized, with a quiet kind of sadness, that maybe this lunch wasn't about making peace. Maybe it was about performance. Still, I straightened my back, placed my napkin gently on my lap, and whispered a small prayer. If this was a stage, I would play my part with grace. Because sometimes, even when the world tries to humiliate you, the best revenge, the truest elegance, is simply not letting them see you break. I should have known the moment I sat down that something was off. There was too much sparkle, too much laughter, and none of it reached the eyes. The women sitting beside Vanessa looked me over, the way people inspect something old before deciding if it's worth keeping. Their smiles were tight, their eyes sharper than their jewelry. Vanessa waved a manicured hand toward me. "Ladies, this is my mother-in-law, May Robinson," she said, the word mother-in-law landing too formally, too distant. She insisted on coming when I mentioned we were having lunch here. She's curious about modern dining. Her friends giggled, the kind of laughter that doesn't need a joke to hurt. I felt my throat dry up. I wanted to correct her, to say she had invited me, but something in her voice warned me to stay quiet. "Oh no, dear," I started gently. "You called me. Remember?" Vanessa placed her hand over mine, still smiling for the table. "Mother, please, don't be shy." Her tone was syrup with glass shards in it. The waiter came by, setting down menus. The font was thin, elegant, the kind that hides the pain of the prices. I tried to look casual, scanning dishes I couldn't pronounce. Everything cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Before I could say a word, Vanessa spoke to the waiter, still smiling. "She'll just have the garden salad and water. She's very health conscious." It took me a second to realize she was talking about me. I blinked. "Oh, I can choose for myself, dear," I said softly. Her smile froze. "Mother, I know you're on a budget. Let's not make a scene." The words dropped like stones into a still pond, and every eye around the table, maybe even in the room, seemed to turn toward me. For a moment, I thought the ground might open beneath me. The blood in my face burned, my hands trembled in my lap. The chandelier above flickered, scattering bits of gold light over the marble floor. That light reminded me of the roses outside my home, how they kept blooming no matter how harsh the weather. So I took a deep breath, forced my hands still, and smiled the kind of smile you learn from years of swallowing pride. "It's fine," I said quietly. "A salad will do just fine." Her friends giggled again, their laughter light but cruel. One whispered something about old-fashioned manners. I caught it, every syllable. But I pretended not to. Pretending can be a kind of armor. As they chattered about vacations, handbags, and business deals, I sat there listening, nodding, letting their voices wash over me. It felt strange being surrounded by so much noise, yet feeling completely invisible. That's when I realized invisibility has a sound. It's the silence that sits right next to laughter. Halfway through the meal, I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed against the velvet box, soft, familiar, warm with memory. "Vanessa," I said, smiling. "I brought something for you." She turned, mid-laugh, her glass of champagne halfway to her lips. "For me, yes, dear." I placed the box on the table and opened it gently. Inside, the gold bracelet caught the light. It wasn't new or shiny, but it gleamed with the quiet kind of beauty only time can give. It belonged to my mother. "I thought you might like to have it as part of our family." For a second, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe tenderness, but it was gone before it could stay. "Oh, May," she said, laughing softly. That's sweet. But I don't really wear vintage pieces. They're not my style. Her friends leaned closer. Is that real gold? One whispered. Vanessa shrugged. I'm not sure. Probably sentimental more than valuable. The laughter that followed was louder this time. It didn't echo off the walls, it echoed inside me. I stared at the bracelet, still glowing under the chandelier. Its engraving. Faith keeps you graceful, barely visible now. Faith, grace. Two words that felt like promises and punishments all at once. I felt something inside me begin to crack. I wanted to stand up, to tell them that the bracelet was more valuable than all their glitter combined, because it had survived generations of women who endured storms stronger than vanity. But my voice wouldn't move. Instead, I sat there quiet, small, while humiliation burned through me like a fever. When the waiter brought the bill, Vanessa smiled sweetly and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, I suppose I'll cover this one. It's fine. Mother, I know you probably didn't bring enough. This time, the laughter was joined by a murmur from another table. People were watching. I felt the weight of their eyes, the pity mixed with judgment. That was when something inside me shifted. I looked up, not down, and met Vanessa's gaze. She expected shame, but what she found was something else entirely. Calm, clarity. I smiled, the soft, unsettling kind of smile that comes right before the storm. Thank you, dear, I said. But remember what you give in arrogance, life takes back in kind. Her smirk faltered for a second, just a second. But I saw it. After that, the world around me seemed to move in slow motion. The clink of glasses, the hum of piano music, the perfume that smelled like money and insecurity, all of it blurred together. As I stood to leave, I noticed my reflection in the tall mirror by the door. My eyes looked tired, but there was something else there too, a spark. It wasn't anger, it wasn't bitterness, it was recognition. For years, I had mistaken silence for grace and patience for peace. I had believed that love meant letting yourself be small, as long as it made others comfortable. But at that moment, looking into that mirror, I saw what I had become, an ATM with feelings. A special person only when someone needed something. And I realized that's not love. That's convenience. I stepped out into the sunlight. The city was loud, alive, rushing past me, but I walked slowly. The air tasted different, bitter, but honest. There's something sacred about humiliation. It scrapes you raw until you see what's real, what's left, when pride is stripped away. I thought about my mother's words again. Faith keeps you graceful. Maybe she didn't mean faith in others. Maybe she meant faith in yourself, in your own worth, even when no one else sees it. When I reached home, I went straight to the garden. The roses were glowing under the afternoon sun, wild and unbothered. I knelt down, brushing my hand over the petals. They called you old-fashioned too, didn't they? I whispered. A breeze passed through, rustling the leaves. I smiled. Maybe that was their way of answering. In that moment, I understood something simple but sharp. Grace doesn't mean staying silent. It means standing tall without shouting. It means walking away with your head held high, even when your heart feels like breaking. And maybe, just maybe, that lunch, that cruel little performance, wasn't meant to destroy me. Maybe it was meant to wake me, because sometimes life breaks your roses, just so you can learn they still know how to bloom. That night, as I sat by the window with my cup of tea, I whispered into the quiet, I'm done being the ATM with feelings. I'm done being the special person people remember only when it's convenient. I'm going to remember myself now. The stars outside shimmered faintly, like 1,000 tiny bracelets in the sky. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen by me. The house felt different that night. Quieter, but not the kind of quiet that comforts you. It was the heavy, breathless quiet that follows humiliation, the kind that sits on your shoulders like a weight you can't shake off. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't cry right away. I just stood there, staring at the little framed photos on the wall, pictures of Michael as a boy, of Charles smiling beside me on our wedding day, of the church picnic where I wore that same lavender dress I'd worn to the Azure. I used to love that dress. Tonight, I couldn't even look at it. I walked to the kitchen and made tea out of habit, though I knew I wouldn't drink it. The kettle's whistle sounded almost human, like it was sighing with me. I sat down at the table, fingers tracing the rim of the teacup. I thought of the laughter hers, her friends, the kind that stabbed without leaving bruises. It's funny, isn't it? You can go through childbirth, bury your husband, live through decades of struggle, yet a few cruel words can cut deeper than a lifetime of hardship, because they make you question not just your place in the world, but your worth in it. I thought about calling Michael, telling him what had happened, but then I pictured his face, that polite discomfort, that forced little smile that says, "Mama, don't make things complicated." He wouldn't believe I was humiliated. Or worse, he would believe it but choose not to see. That's the kind of blindness love sometimes becomes convenient. So instead, I sat there and whispered to the empty room, "I'm tired of being everyone's special person only when it suits them." The words surprised me. They sounded louder than I meant them to be. Charles used to call me his special person. Back then, it made me feel cherished. But somewhere along the way, that phrase turned into something else, a label people used to disguise how little they actually saw me. I was special when they needed comfort. I was special when they needed babysitting. I was special when they needed money. But when I needed understanding, space, or even just respect, I became invisible again. That's when the thought came to me. Maybe I wasn't a special person. Maybe I was an ATM with feelings, a machine that dispensed care, warmth, and dollars. Always with a smile, even when the balance was running dry. The tea went cold. I stood up, walked to the living room, and found the velvet box on the coffee table. The gold bracelet lay inside, catching the faint street light that slipped through the curtains. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The engraving, "Faith keeps you graceful," was fading, almost gone. Faith, I murmured. Grace. Two words I had tried to live by all my life. But tonight, I wondered if grace had a limit. Maybe grace, without boundaries, becomes submission. And maybe faith, when misplaced, turns into denial. I'd always believed that being good, being kind, being patient was the way to love. But what if love, real love, requires something harder? What if it requires saying, "Enough"? I set the bracelet down and walked to the window. Outside, my roses were sleeping in the dark, still standing, even after the storm last week. I thought of my mother. She'd grown up in the South, during a time when women like her weren't supposed to raise their voices. Yet she once told me, "May, silence can be a blessing, but it can also be a cage. Don't decorate your cage with grace." I had never understood what she meant until now. all my life. I had mistaken endurance for strength. I thought turning the other cheek made me noble. But as I looked at those roses swaying gently in the night breeze, I realized strength isn't about how much you can take, it's about knowing when to stop taking. Grace doesn't mean shrinking. It means standing tall without apology. The clock struck midnight. I was still standing by the window, watching the empty street. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about anyone else, not Michael, not Vanessa, not the neighbors who pitied me for living alone. I was thinking about me, the woman who had worked 2 jobs so her son could go to college, the woman who had kept a roof over their heads when her husband's heart gave out too soon, the woman who never complained when people took more than they gave. That woman deserved peace. And maybe, after all these years, she deserved power too, not the kind that humiliates others, but the kind that comes from knowing her own worth. I felt something shift inside me, small but certain. It wasn't anger. Anger burns too fast. This was something slower, heavier, steadier. A quiet fire that doesn't want to destroy but wants to illuminate. I whispered into the dark. I've spent my life being the ATM with feelings, but no more. I'm done dispensing without limits. I've given my love freely, but from now on, it'll come with boundaries, not walls, but gates that open for those who truly see me. Later, when I finally lay down, sleep didn't come easy. My mind replayed every word, every sneer, every time I laughed along to avoid making others uncomfortable. And then, like a movie reel, it played all the moments I'd said yes when my heart whispered no. I remembered when Vanessa first joined the family, how she called me Mom at Thanksgiving, how she pretended to love my sweet potato pie, how she told everyone I was her inspiration. I believed her. I wanted to, because deep down, every mother wants to be seen not as old, but as needed. But maybe that's the trap when love becomes need, and need becomes dependence. That's when people stop seeing you as a soul and start seeing you as a service. Maybe that's what had happened to me. I wasn't a person anymore in their story, just a role. The dependable mother, the forgiving elder, the wallet that always opens, an ATM with feelings. Sometime before dawn, I must have drifted to sleep. When I woke, the house was bathed in soft gold light, the kind that makes everything look gentler than it is. I went outside to check on the roses. Dew clung to their petals like tiny diamonds. I touched one bloom, fragile, imperfect, but alive. And it hit me. No one waters these roses but me. No one tends to them, trims the dead leaves, clears the weeds. Yet they bloom faithfully, quietly, beautifully. They don't need applause. They don't need validation. They just do what they were made to do. Maybe I was a rose too. Maybe all I needed was to stop waiting for someone else to notice the garden I'd built. That morning, as I poured myself fresh tea, I made a decision, a quiet one, but it felt monumental. I wouldn't call Vanessa. I wouldn't chase Michael for sympathy. I wouldn't beg to be seen. Instead, I would learn to see myself again. I opened the small notebook I used to jot down grocery lists and wrote, "Faith keeps you graceful, but self-respect keeps you whole." Then I underlined it twice. Outside, the roses shimmered in the sun. I smiled at them, my little army of survivors. For the first time, I didn't see them as just flowers. I saw them as mirrors. And I thought maybe grace isn't about never breaking. Maybe it's about learning how to bloom again after you've been broken. That day, something inside me began to bloom too. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It was something deeper, the beginning of understanding that love, without dignity, isn't love at all. And that realization, quiet as it was, felt like freedom. A few days passed after that lunch, but the echo of it lingered like a bruise you keep pressing just to make sure it's still there. I went through the motions making coffee, watering the roses, folding laundry, but something inside me had shifted. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt awake. That awakening came with questions, the kind I had avoided for too long. Questions about my son, about Vanessa, about the life I'd built around their happiness. It's strange how you can live decades thinking love is light, only to realize sometimes it blinds you. That morning, I found an envelope in the mail. It was from the bank, a quarterly statement, the kind I used to glance at quickly before tossing into a drawer. But this time, I read every line. There, printed in black and white, was my name, or rather, the absence of it. The joint investment account I'd opened years ago to help Michael get his business off the ground was now listed under Michael Robinson and Vanessa Green Robinson. My name had been quietly replaced. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a clerical error. Maybe. I called the number at the bottom of the statement after a few transfers and polite apologies. A woman's voice came on the line. Yes, Mrs. Robinson, she said. According to our records, the ownership was updated last year. You're listed as a secondary beneficiary, not a primary account holder. Her words were soft, professional, but to me, they felt like ice water. So, if something happens, I asked, my voice trembling, it doesn't belong to me anymore. There was a pause. Technically, no. I thanked her and hung up. My hand shook as I set the phone down. I had trusted them. I had handed over every cent of my savings, my retirement, my husband's insurance, the little nest egg I'd built from 40 years of work, all because I believed in them. I believed love meant never asking for proof. But maybe love needs receipts too. I went for a walk after that call. The sun was high, but I barely noticed it. My mind was heavy, crowded with memories of every thank you that really meant you owe me. I thought of the first time Vanessa asked for help, the down payment on their new house. It's an investment. Mother May, she'd said. Family money staying in the family. Then came the new car, then the business loan. Each time, I'd said yes without hesitation. Not because I was foolish, but because I was hopeful. Because I thought generosity was how you prove love. Now I realize generosity without discernment is just another word for self-erasure. I sat down on a park bench, watching children chase each other under the trees. Their laughter was free, unfiltered, full of life. Somewhere along the line, adulthood teaches us how to edit that laughter to replace it with politeness, performance, pretense. I thought about how I'd spent years editing myself for others, softening my words, shrinking my needs, always staying appropriate, all for what? To be loved conditionally, to stay someone's special person, as long as I didn't ask for too much. I shook my head, whispering under my breath, even ATMs have passwords. Maybe it's time I changed mine. That evening, I drove to the bank. The teller, a young woman named Kayla, smiled kindly as she greeted me. How can I help you today, Mrs. Robinson? I told her I wanted to make changes to my account. When she pulled it up, her eyebrows rose slightly. That's quite a large sum. Ma'am, are you sure you want to transfer all of it? Yes, I said, my voice calm. I'm sure. She hesitated, maybe thinking I'd been pressured. If I may ask, what would you like to do with it? I smiled, not the polite kind, but the steady kind that comes when you finally see the truth and don't look away. I'm starting something new, something of my own. When I left the bank, a sense of peace followed me out the door. For years, I'd equated money with obligation, with proving my worth as a mother, as a widow, as a woman trying to hold everyone together. But walking back to my car, I realized something simple and powerful. Money isn't love, it's choice. And I finally had mine back. That night, I took out my old notebook, the one filled with grocery lists and Sunday sermon notes, and began writing. I didn't know exactly what it would become, but I knew it had to start somewhere. Page 1, The Golden Bracelet Project. It came to me so naturally, I almost laughed. The name felt right. My mother's bracelet had been mocked at that fancy restaurant, but it still shone brighter than all their jewels combined. It had survived hands that worked, hearts that broke, and generations that kept on rising anyway. I wanted to honor that, not with revenge, but with purpose. I wrote the Golden Bracelet Project, a community fund for single mothers, grandmothers, and women forgotten by their own families. A reminder that grace is not weakness, and love is not servitude. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The next morning, I went to see my friend Ruby, the kind of friend who tells you the truth, even when it stings. May. She said after I told her everything, "You've been giving people the keys to your heart, your house, your bank account, and they've been redecorating it to suit themselves." I chuckled softly. I just wanted to be a good mother. Ruby leaned forward, eyes kind but firm. "Baby, good mothers teach their children how to love without taking advantage. You weren't raising a son, you were raising a man, somewhere along the way." He forgot the difference. Her words settled deep, like medicine, bitter but healing. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You know what I think. You're not done yet. You've got another chapter, and this time you're writing it for you." On the drive home, I thought about that, about writing my own chapter. For too long, I'd been a supporting character in other people's stories, the wise, reliable woman in the background. But even supporting characters have backstories, dreams, and voices worth hearing. That night, I looked around my small, quiet home, the one I had built, maintained, and loved all these years, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: ownership. This house, this life, this peace, they were mine. I took the bracelet out once more, holding it against the lamplight. It shimmered faintly, as if nodding in agreement. "You're not an ATM with feelings," I whispered to my reflection. "You're the bank. You've been the foundation all along." I laughed at myself, a soft, tender laugh that came from relief. For decades, I had been measuring love by how much I could give. But maybe love isn't a balance sheet. Maybe it's a garden, one that needs tending, pruning, boundaries. Because if you keep giving away every petal, what will you have left to bloom? Before bed, I wrote one last line in my notebook: "When they forget your value, remind them not with words, but with choices." I closed the notebook, placed it beside the velvet box, and turned off the light. In the dark, the roses outside brushed against the window. Their shadows danced on the wall, delicate, defiant, alive. And I realized, with a quiet smile, that I was just like them, still standing, still blooming, still learning that grace without boundaries isn't grace at all. It's surrender. and I was done surrendering. After that day at the bank, something in me began to move differently, slower, steadier, more deliberate. For the first time in years, my decisions were my own. I didn't rush to ask, "Will this make them happy?" I asked, "Does this bring me peace?" It felt strange at first, like learning to walk again after being someone's shadow for too long. The silence in my house was no longer a wound, it became a kind of music. I could hear myself think. I started spending mornings at the community center down the street, the one most people forgot existed. It was a small, worn-down building tucked behind an old Baptist church. Paint peeling, chairs mismatched, kids running wild with joy. There was something honest about that place, something I hadn't felt in years. Miss Lillian, the director, recognized me from church. May Robinson, Lord have mercy, it's been forever. What brings you down here? I've been looking for a way to be useful again. I said, not as somebody's special person, just as me. She laughed softly. Well, baby, you're special enough on your own. We can use all the help we can get. So I started helping, teaching piano to the little ones, organizing donated clothes, listening to stories from single mothers who worked night shifts just to keep lights on. I didn't have to fix anyone. I just had to show up. And in showing up, I realized something: the world doesn't need you to be perfect. It just needs you to be present. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old music books, I found a crumpled photo, a group of children holding instruments with cardboard signs that read, "Golden Hearts." Miss Lillian smiled when she saw me holding it. "That was from back in the day," she said. "We used to run a little after-school music program, but it fell apart when the funding stopped." Something inside me stirred. The words "Golden Hearts" felt like a message sent straight to me. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table with my cup of tea, the idea bloomed like a rose opening in slow motion. What if I brought it back? What if I used my money, my own, honest money, to give those kids a space to belong, to learn, to feel seen, not charity, dignity? I whispered into the empty room. The Golden Bracelet Project meets the Golden Hearts. It sounded right. It sounded alive. The next morning, I met with Miss Lillian and shared my plan. Her eyes went wide. "May, are you serious? This could change everything for this neighborhood." "I am serious," I said, "but I don't want my name on it. I just want it to happen." She nodded slowly, understanding. There was a power in anonymity, a kind of grace that didn't need applause. Within weeks, we had a plan. New instruments, art supplies, uniforms for the kids. I worked behind the scenes, quietly funding everything. Watching their smiles become brighter each day was a kind of healing no doctor could prescribe. But fate, as it always does, had a sense of irony. Because a month later, Vanessa came bursting into my house unannounced, the first time she'd visited since the lunch. "Mother May," she said, her voice sweet, rehearsed. "I have amazing news." I set my teacup down carefully. "Do tell." She sat across from me, crossing her legs in that polished way of hers. "I've been chosen to host a citywide charity gala next month. It's called, get this, the Golden Hearts Gala." The name hit me like deja vu. I felt the faintest smile tug at my lips. "Golden Hearts, you say?" "Yes," she said, eyes shining. "It's for a children's community program. The director said some mysterious donor revived their funding, and they needed a public face to promote it. Of course, they picked me." She paused, waiting for me to be impressed. I looked at her, at the flawless makeup, the expensive dress, the practiced enthusiasm, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt steady. "Well, that's wonderful, Vanessa," I said. "Truly wonderful." She beamed. "I knew you'd be proud. You've always taught me about giving back." I almost laughed. Giving back, yes, but never like this. Never for applause. As she talked about press coverage, VIP guests, sponsorship tiers, I realized that life had handed me a perfect mirror. The very same woman who once humiliated me in a restaurant now unknowingly stood on the stage. I built the one fueled by grace she had mistaken for weakness. And that was when I felt it, the quiet fire. It wasn't revenge. Revenge burns too hot, too fast. This was something slower, deeper, the kind of fire that warms your soul instead of scorching it. That night, I sat in the garden again, watching my roses glow under the porch light. I thought about cycles, how life has a way of circling back, making people face the lessons they tried to skip. Vanessa had once said, "We all need to know our place." And now, without realizing it, she was about to learn hers, not because I demanded it, but because truth has its own gravity. I looked at those roses, blooming despite the chill. And I understood something about grace. It isn't about staying silent when someone wrongs you. It's about knowing when to speak and when to let life do the talking for you. Maybe this was my moment of quiet revenge, not the cruel kind, but the poetic kind. The kind that whispers, "You can't bury someone who knows how to grow roots." Over the following weeks, I helped Miss Lillian prepare the children for their big performance at the gala. Every time I saw their joy, I felt stronger. One little girl named Ava, barely 8, asked me one day, "Miss May, why do you always wear that gold bracelet?" I smiled and looked down at it, that same vintage piece that had once been laughed at. "Because it reminds me who I am," I said, "and who I never want to forget to be." "Special people?" she asked. "Curious?" "Yes," I said softly. "Special people, but not the kind who need to be noticed. The kind who shine even when no one's looking." She grinned. "Then I want to be one too." And just like that, I realized something profound. When you stop begging to be seen, you start helping others see themselves. The day before the gala, I wrote a note to myself and tucked it inside my purse beside the bracelet. It said, "You are not an ATM with feelings. You are the whole bank of wisdom, grace, and history. You've invested love in the right places. Let it bloom." I knew tomorrow would be more than just a charity event. It would be the closing of one chapter and the blooming of another. That night, as I blew out the candles in my living room, I whispered to the empty air, "Charles, if you can hear me, I think you'd be proud of your stubborn old wife." The house creaked softly, as if agreeing. I went to bed with the softest smile. The humiliation that once haunted me had turned into something sacred, fuel for transformation. Because maybe that's what grace really is, the art of turning pain into purpose, and purpose into peace. And as I drifted to sleep, I thought of all the special people in this world, the mothers, grandmothers, and forgotten souls who love without limit and lose themselves in the process. Maybe it was time someone reminded them, you don't stop being special just because they stop seeing it. Sometimes the world just needs to catch up to your quiet fire. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't the anxious kind of restlessness that keeps you pacing the floor. It was quieter than that, steadier, like the hum of something sacred just beneath the skin. For the first time in a long while, I felt ready. Not for revenge, not for applause, just ready to stand. The air was cool and heavy with the smell of rain. I sat by the window, the same one where I'd once cried after that humiliating lunch. The city lights shimmered faintly in the distance, and I thought about how strange life can be, how the same streets that once carried your shame can someday carry your redemption. I had my gown laid out on the bed, a simple silver gray dress with long sleeves and a soft shimmer under the lamplight. Nothing extravagant, but it carried something no designer label could ever sell: quiet dignity. It was the kind of dress a woman wears when she no longer needs to prove anything. Beside it sat my mother's gold bracelet, the vintage trinket, as Vanessa once called it. I ran my fingers over the engraving. Faith keeps you graceful. I smiled because I'd finally learned what that meant. Faith doesn't mean keeping still. It means trusting that the pain you've carried will one day make sense, that it was never meant to crush you, only to carve you into something truer. I walked over to the mirror and studied the face looking back at me. Time had written its story there, the soft lines, the silver hair, the eyes that had seen too much and still refused to dim. There was a time when I would have wished that reflection younger, smoother, prettier, the way the world likes its women. But now, I wouldn't trade those years, not one of them. Each wrinkle was a page in a book that only I could read. I whispered to my reflection, "You've been everyone's special person. May now be your own." The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I brewed tea, but I didn't drink it. I just held the cup for warmth, letting the steam rise like a quiet prayer. When the sun came up, it painted the roses outside in gold. They were blooming again, wild, unapologetic, defying the chill of autumn. I thought about how often I'd compared myself to those roses. They didn't ask for permission to grow. They just did. And maybe that's the whole secret. I took my time getting ready that day. I curled my hair the way Charles used to love, dabbed on a hint of rose perfume, and clasped the gold bracelet around my wrist. It fit a little looser than before, but that felt right too, like I had finally grown beyond the weight of other people's expectations. As I fastened the clasp, I thought of every woman I'd ever known who gave until she disappeared: mothers, grandmothers, caretakers, wives, women who turned themselves into ATMs with feelings, machines of endless patience and service, yet forgot that they were built for more than giving. I closed my eyes and whispered, "We don't owe anyone our silence." By noon, I was at the community center helping the children rehearse one last time before the gala. The building buzzed with excitement, laughter bouncing off the walls, music notes tumbling out of open doors. Little Ava tugged at my sleeve. "Miss May, are you nervous?" I smiled. "A little." She tilted her head. "But you're always calm. Even roses shake a little before they bloom." "I said," she giggled, not quite understanding, but her laughter filled the room with light. The children's performance was the soul of the event, their small orchestra, their songs, their joy. Watching them made me realize that what I'd built wasn't revenge at all. It was restoration. A reminder that the things we give, the good things, always come back, just not from the people we expect. As the afternoon slipped into evening, I returned home to dress. The silver gown shimmered like moonlight against my skin. I pinned a small white rose to my hair, my quiet rebellion, my symbol of resilience. Before leaving, I stood for a long moment at the mirror again. The bracelet caught the light, glowing like a halo around my wrist. I whispered to the woman staring back at me, You're not walking into their world tonight. You're walking into your own. The car ride to the venue felt surreal. The city glowed not in its usual loud way, but softly, like it was holding its breath. When the driver stopped in front of the Azure, the same place where I'd been humiliated weeks ago, I almost laughed. Life really does have a sense of theater. The same marble steps, the same golden doors, the same chandelier waiting inside, but this time, everything felt different. Because I was different. I stepped out slowly, the hem of my dress brushing the pavement. People turned their heads. Some smiled, some stared, but I didn't look away. I walked like I belonged there, not because I needed to, but because I had earned the right to take up space. Inside, the air smelled of champagne and ambition. Cameras flashed, the guests sparkled under the lights, their laughter bouncing off the walls. And there, at the center of it all, was Vanessa. She was radiant gold gown, diamond earrings, that same perfect posture. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her. She had everything shiny, yet nothing solid. When she spotted me, her expression flickered surprise, confusion, maybe even guilt, but she recovered quickly. "Mother May," she exclaimed, forcing a smile. "What a surprise. You look wonderful." "Thank you, dear," I said gently. I wouldn't miss this night for the world. Her eyes narrowed, curiosity sharp behind the gloss of politeness. "Oh, and what brings you here?" I smiled. "Let's just say, I have a small connection to the cause." Before she could ask more, someone called her name for an interview. She turned away, her attention swallowed by cameras and flattery. I stood there for a while, watching her perform, every smile rehearsed, every gesture deliberate. And I thought once, I would have envied that kind of confidence. Now, I only felt compassion, because I knew what it was built on: validation that always had to be fed, applause that faded as quickly as it came. As the guests took their seats, the music began. The children's orchestra, led by little Ava in her blue dress. They played beautifully. Every note carried joy, hope, and something more powerful: truth. The same room that had once echoed with laughter at my expense now filled with a different sound, the sound of grace finding its voice. I sat near the back, my hands folded in my lap, tears warming the corners of my eyes. No one knew the full story. No one knew that the entire event, the lights, the decorations, the instruments, had been made possible by the woman sitting quietly in the shadows. And that was how I wanted it. Because sometimes, the most powerful people in the room are the ones who don't need to announce themselves. When the performance ended, the applause was thunderous. Vanessa walked up to the podium, glowing under the spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice full of pride. "Thank you for joining us at this year's Golden Hearts Gala. Tonight, we celebrate generosity, community, and compassion." I smiled faintly. Compassion, I thought. How beautifully ironic. As she continued her speech, I looked around the room at the faces lit by candlelight, at the children still grinning, at the roses adorning each table. Everything shimmered, alive with grace. And in that moment, I realized something. Sometimes you don't have to fight for the truth. You just have to be it. Because the truth, much like grace, doesn't shout. It just waits. And when the time is right, it walks in quietly, dressed in silver, wearing a gold bracelet that once carried the weight of every woman who ever chose dignity over despair. Tomorrow, The headlines would tell a story Vanessa couldn't control. But tonight, I didn't need headlines. I had peace. And peace, I was learning, was the most exquisite form of victory there is. The air inside the azure shimmered like gold dust when Vanessa began her speech. Every word rolled off her tongue as if she had practiced it in front of a mirror, which, knowing her, she probably had. The crowd adored her. Cameras flashed, wine glasses clinked, and the hum of admiration filled the room like a steady drumbeat. I sat quietly near the back, my hands folded on my lap, my gold bracelet glinting softly under the chandelier light. It felt almost poetic, this same place where I had once been humiliated, now transformed into a stage for grace to take its bow. Vanessa's voice carried through the room. Tonight, we celebrate generosity and heart. The Golden Hearts Gala represents what I believe to be the best in us: compassion, elegance, the courage to give. Her smile could have sold miracles. I almost admired it. But then she added, "And of course, I'm so proud to have made this vision a reality. I've worked tirelessly to make tonight possible." The applause came, polite but eager. I watched her bask in it, her head tilted slightly to catch the perfect camera angle. She had mastered the art of appearing humble while feeding on attention. For a fleeting moment, I thought about walking out. I didn't come here to embarrass her. I came to witness truth, not vengeance. But something deep inside me whispered, "Stay." Because sometimes silence needs an audience too. The MC walked onto the stage, taking the microphone from Vanessa's perfectly manicured hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Robinson," he said warmly. "Before we begin the charity auction, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the person who made tonight possible." Vanessa beamed, ready to step forward again. The MC continued. "The true benefactor behind the Golden Hearts Gala, the woman who personally covered every cost, every donation, every smile you see here tonight, is none other than—" He paused. The silence was electric. "Mrs. May Robinson." For a moment, the world stopped. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The sound of gasps, the click of cameras, the collective turning of heads filled the air like thunder in slow motion. Vanessa's smile froze a portrait of disbelief. When I finally stood, the crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't loud or wild, but it was real, the kind of clapping that comes from people who feel something shift in the room. I walked forward slowly, each step echoing against the marble floor. The same floor I had walked weeks ago, head bowed, hands trembling. Tonight, my steps were steady. The MC handed me the microphone. My fingers didn't shake. "Good evening," I began. My voice was calm, steady, warmer than I expected. I didn't plan to speak tonight, but life has a funny way of bringing us full circle. I looked around the room at the guests, at the children smiling in the corner, at the reporters lowering their cameras, curious. When I first learned about this event, I wanted it to be something beautiful, something that reminded people that giving is not about being seen, it's about seeing. My eyes found Vanessa. She stood a few feet away, her posture stiff, her eyes glassy but defiant. I didn't flinch. I wanted this night to honor the real Golden Hearts, the people who give without expecting applause. The mothers who work 2 jobs, the grandmothers who raise other people's children, the people who keep showing up even when nobody says thank you. A quiet ripple of agreement moved through the room. I took a deep breath and went on. "You see, I spent a long time believing that love meant sacrifice, that being someone's special person meant giving until you disappeared. But I've learned something: love without respect is just a transaction, and I am done being the ATM with feelings. A few people laughed softly, not mockingly, but knowingly, the kind of laugh that says, "I've been there too." I smiled. I stand here not to boast, but to remind anyone who has ever been made to feel small. Grace is not weakness, silence is not surrender, and forgiveness. I paused, looking straight at Vanessa. Forgiveness is not permission for someone to keep hurting you. The room fell utterly still. Vanessa looked like she was searching for air. I could see her trying to hold her composure, chin lifted, eyes darting toward Michael, who stood off to the side, pale and speechless. When our eyes met, I didn't see anger in her. I saw something else: confusion, fear, maybe even shame. But I didn't need her tears. This wasn't about punishment. It was about truth being spoken into the same air that once held lies. I turned back to the audience. I want to thank this city for believing in the power of community. Every dollar raised tonight will go to the Golden Hearts program for children who deserve music, education, and hope. Because that's what generosity is meant to do: heal, not humiliate. Applause broke out again, this time louder. I smiled gently. And as for me, I've learned that true elegance doesn't need validation. It simply is. When I stepped off the stage, people stood to shake my hand, to thank me, to tell me I had inspired them. But all I could feel was relief, not pride, not triumph, just a deep, cleansing release. Michael approached slowly, eyes filled with guilt. "Mom, I didn't know," he said quietly. "I swear, I didn't know what she'd done to you. I should have." I touched his arm. "You know now, and that's enough." He looked down. "I'm so sorry." I smiled softly. "You don't need to be sorry, son. You just need to be better behind him." Vanessa stood frozen, her perfect posture wilted. Cameras still hovered nearby, but no one was looking at her anymore. They were looking at the story, the one they hadn't expected. When our eyes met one last time, I gave her a small nod, not out of pity, but peace. She needed to live with her reflection, and that was punishment enough. Later that night, as I stood outside the restaurant, the city air wrapped around me like a quiet hymn. Inside, the music had resumed, but I didn't need to stay. I'd already had my closure. As I waited for the car, I looked up at the sky. The stars were faint, but they were there, stubborn and shining. Funny, I thought, how some things glow brighter after darkness tries to swallow them. That was the thing about grace: it doesn't roar, it whispers, and when it finally speaks, the whole room listens. On the drive home, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who thought love meant invisibility, who stayed quiet to keep the peace. I thought about the countless women who've mistaken servitude for strength, and I wished I could tell them what I'd learned. You don't need to be someone's special person to be extraordinary. You were already special before they even saw you. When I reached home, I stepped out of the car and stood among my roses. The night air was soft, cool, forgiving. I bent down and brushed my hand over a bloom, pink, alive, resilient. It reminded me of my mother, of every woman who had taught me that dignity was not a performance, but a way of breathing. I whispered, "We bloomed, Mama." We finally bloomed. Then I walked inside, leaving the night behind me but carrying its light within. Because sometimes the most powerful moments of life aren't the ones where you win, they're the ones where you witness your own worth. And that night, under the chandeliers of the azure, surrounded by the same people who once made me feel small, I didn't just find grace, I became it. The morning after the gala, the world felt softer, not quieter, not emptier, just lighter. The kind of lightness that comes after a long storm finally breaks and the air smells new again. When I woke, sunlight was spilling through the curtains, gentle and golden, like the world was trying to apologize for all the times it had been cruel. The roses outside my window were blooming defiant, alive, reaching toward the light without hesitation. For the first time in years, I didn't rush to make breakfast or check messages or think about anyone else's needs. I just lay there, letting the peace settle. The house didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt mine. I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, the same spot where I had once cried, questioned myself, and sworn I'd never let love humiliate me again. The same spot where I had promised to stop being the ATM with feelings. Now, sitting there, I smiled at the memory. I realized that promise had been more than defiance. It had been the beginning of self-respect. It's funny how easily we confuse love with duty, how we let guilt masquerade as kindness. But love without dignity isn't love. It's servitude wearing a smile. That's what I had learned. That's what last night had proven. Vanessa had built her world out of mirrors, all surface, no soul. And for a long time, I'd stood in those reflections, trying to fit her version of who I was supposed to be: soft, silent, grateful. But last night, I finally stepped out of the frame. And when I did, I found something more beautiful than approval. I found peace. Around mid-morning, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, Michael stood there, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. He looked smaller somehow, not in size, but in certainty, like the air had been knocked out of him. "Can I come in?" "Mom," he asked. I nodded and stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd spent so many evenings waiting for a call that never came. "I didn't sleep last night." He began quietly. "I kept thinking about everything, about how blind I've been. I didn't say anything. I just listened." He took a deep breath. "You know, when I saw you standing on that stage, I realized how long I've been mistaking silence for strength. I thought you didn't need defending because you never complained, but you weren't fine. I just didn't want to see it." He looked at me, guilt clouding his eyes. "Vanessa." I held up my hand gently. "This isn't about Vanessa anymore. It's about you." He nodded slowly. "I know." "I let her shape how I saw you. And I'm sorry for that. You didn't deserve it." I sipped my tea, then reached across the table, touching his hand. "I appreciate that, son. But more than your apology, I need your awareness. Don't let comfort make you blind again, not to me, not to anyone." He swallowed hard. "You've always been my special person." "Mom." The words, once a balm, now landed differently. They didn't fill me, they freed me. I smiled softly. "That's kind of you to say, but I think it's time for me to be my own special person now." He smiled too, a sad, proud smile. "I think that's exactly what Dad would have wanted." We sat there for a while in quiet understanding. Not the heavy silence of the past, but a new kind, the kind that speaks without words. After he left, I walked out into the garden. The roses were swaying in the breeze, their petals glistening with dew. I thought about how they'd been my constant companions through every chapter, through love and loss, shame and redemption. Life, I realized, is a lot like tending roses. You prune what no longer serves you. You water what still has life. And sometimes you let the thorns remind you that beauty and pain can grow on the same stem. I brushed my hand over a bloom and whispered, "We made it, didn't we?" Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang again. It was Miss Lillian from the community center, holding a bouquet of white lilies and an envelope. "These are from the kids," she said, smiling. "They wanted to thank you." I opened the card inside. Scrawled in uneven handwriting were the words, "Thank you for giving us music. You're our special person." My throat tightened. I laughed through the tears that came anyway. It was strange I'd spent most of my life chasing those words, wanting someone to call me special. Now, hearing it from children who had nothing to give but gratitude, I finally understood what it was supposed to mean. Being special isn't about being needed. It's about being known. Those children didn't see me as a bank or a background character. They saw me fully, simply, human. And for the first time, I believed them. That evening, I took a walk through the neighborhood. People I didn't know smiled and waved, recognizing me from the papers. The headline that morning had read, "May Robinson, the woman who redefined grace." The younger me would have blushed and waved the attention away. But this version of me, the one who had stood in her own truth, just smiled and whispered, "Thank you," not to them, but to the journey itself. I passed the church on the corner, its doors still open from evening service. Inside, the choir was singing softly. I slipped into the back pew, closed my eyes, and let the music wash over me. The song wasn't about victory or vengeance. It was about peace, the kind that comes after you finally stop running from yourself. And in that quiet space, I thought of every woman who has ever been unseen, the ones who cook and care and carry, whose names never make the headlines, who give until they vanish. I wanted to tell them, you are not invisible. You are not just someone's mother, wife, or helper. You are the story itself, the pulse that keeps the world alive. When I got home, the house smelled like roses and rain. I made one last cup of tea, sat by the window, and opened my notebook. The pages were filled now with notes, lessons, reflections. At the bottom of the last page, I wrote, "Love others deeply, but love yourself fiercely. Faith keeps you graceful. Boundaries keep you whole." I closed the book and placed it beside the velvet box where the gold bracelet rested. Its shine hadn't faded. If anything, it looked brighter, as though it had absorbed every ounce of strength from the hands that wore it. I smiled. Maybe that's how life works. We pass on what we've learned, not through grand gestures, but through quiet persistence. Before I turned in for the night, I looked out at the roses one last time. The moonlight draped over them like silk. "Thank you," I whispered, "for reminding me that grace doesn't grow in comfort. It blooms in the dirt, under the weight of everything we've survived." And as I stood there, I realized that I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval anymore. Not Michael's, not Vanessa's, not the world's. I had given myself the one thing I'd always given everyone else: unconditional love. Maybe that's the final truth of it all. We spend so much of life trying to be someone's special person, not realizing we already are to ourselves, to the small kindnesses we've sown, to the lives we've quietly touched. And maybe, when we finally stop being ATMs with feelings and start being souls with purpose, that's when we truly live. As I turned off the lights and whispered a final good night to the world, I smiled to myself and thought, grace doesn't end with applause. It ends with peace. And that peace, that still, shining peace, felt like the truest form of freedom I'd ever known.